Welcome to All In, a straight-shooting, science-based podcast about periods, fertility, and nurturing health outside of unrealistic beauty expectations. We will mostly, but not exclusively, focus on hypothalamic amenorrhea, HA, a component of relative energy deficiency in sport, formerly known as the female athlete triad.
I'm Dr. Nicholas Sykes, scientist and author of the book No Period, Now What? I specialize in helping people understand how their eating, exercise, and lifestyle habits are keeping them from hormonal health and their best life. My work focuses on regaining periods, improving fertility, and breaking free of the rules underlying diet culture.
My name is Florence Gillet. I'm a certified eating psychology coach, a former HA patient, and an advocate of health at every size and body neutrality. I help people let go of their obsession with size and appearance to regain self-confidence, finally appreciate their bodies, and live an overall fuller, more joyful life.
Every 2 weeks, the All In podcast brings you real recovery stories, expert insights, and new scientific research on HA, hormonal health, and fertility, with an unmissable touch of body respect and women's empowerment.
Just a reminder that this podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and their guests. This content should not be taken as medical advice. It's for informational purposes only. And because each person is unique, please consult your primary care practitioner for any medical questions. Music by the Andy Shulman Band, available on Spotify.
Everybody. This is actually a really exciting episode for us to record. Today we're bringing you one of the co-authors of No Period, Now What? Lisa Sanfilippo Waddell. It's funny, I can't quite fathom why this didn't occur to us sooner. Lisa and Stephanie both played a large role in the writing and editing of No Period, Now What? And really helped me make the science easy for everyone to digest and understand. So we're going to dig into Lisa's story a bit, and there are lots of snippets from her in the book, so you can always go read that. And we're also going to talk about the partner chapter, which was really Lisa's brainchild. Lisa, welcome to the All In podcast. It's so nice to see you again.
It's great seeing you, Nico and Florence. Honestly, thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited and happy to be here with you both. And it's always a privilege to share experiences that could support others that are working on HA recovery. Like, this is huge, and you guys have been doing so much work. So I'm super excited to be here. I am.
Fantastic. So let's start with a short introduction to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you had HA, like where that came from?
Sure. Well, I am a fur baby mom of 2 dogs and 5 cats and cows and chickens. And I've been in the fitness industry for over 30 years as a strength and conditioning coach with USA weightlifting and CrossFit methods. And my most recent accomplishment is becoming a licensed clinical social worker in Oklahoma and Florida, providing mental health counseling to focus on women's health issues, which most importantly are disordered eating, anxiety, and depression. One of the things that brought me here, I guess, it is a long journey, but I'm going to make it brief because it's actually in your book. But when I was 13, I developed bulimia, and I actually had an eating disorder for 15 years, from like 13 to 28. And my periods were wonky then, but I never lost them because I was probably a healthy weight. And that may have been what's kept my periods going, even though I had a severe eating disorder. But then when I recovered at 28 years old, and I did completely stop binging and purging, I slowly started slipping into getting fit and getting stronger, and kind of slipped into that overtraining, underfueling, or undernourishing, that conundrum. And then I lost my period for close to 10 or 11 years. I wasn't really worried about it. And it's funny because I feel like those behaviors, the disordered eating and the overtraining, they were kind of manifested through, and it's in the book as well, No Period, Now What? Talking about my mom having schizophrenia. And she had OCD, but she had tactile, visual, audio hallucinations. The stress of dealing with that, like exercise and controlling my food, it was an escape. It was a stress reduction. It just was. So anyway, that's kind of how that came about.
When did you realize that that was not quite okay?
Well, you would think that when you lost your period that would have been enough to think that there was a problem, but I think like many, no, I don't want to say many, but there have been people in my circle that were like, yeah, you didn't get your period. That's great. Like, just rock on. But it wasn't until I was diagnosed with osteoporosis where I was like, oh, wait a minute. I have osteoporosis at 29 years old. Like, that was terrifying to me. It wasn't so terrifying, though, that I was willing to do what I needed to do. I will say that. But I think it was partly out of ignorance, right? Not knowing, the solution yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So what were the medical professionals telling you through this time?
So when I was running track in high school and I had bulimia and my periods were wonky, I remember when I was running telling my coach, like, hey, I lost my period. And she was like, oh, that's normal. Like, oh, okay, it's normal. Right. So, okay, so I must be doing what I need to be doing. And then I kind of kept going with the wonky periods. And then I think I did lose my periods, completely. I told you around 27, 28. And that's when I started really kind of digging in. And honestly, and this will kind of crack you up. So 2 out of 10 professionals were worried. The other 8 were basically like, oh, this is common. This is normal for a gal, you're fit, you're working out hard, you're going to lose your period. Let's put you on birth control. And I was like, well, I don't need birth control. Like, it wasn't clicking. Like, how is that going to help me? And again, 2 of the professionals, one was a gynecologist. I'll never forget, because and again, keep in mind, I had an average BMI. I didn't even look quote unquote ripped, but my body, my hypothalamus was like, oh, this is an emergency state for you. That's why we can't compare to other people, right? This is really. So anyway, I remember my gynecologist saying to me, like, you need to just kick back, watch some Oprah. That's how long ago this was. Watch some Oprah and eat some bonbons, and I was like, what is she kidding? I was kind of offended. And then my osteopath, who I kept going to because I kept getting injuries from overtraining. So anyway, he was like, women are not supposed to look like this. I know you think you're strong and lean and fit. He said, but your body weight, you're like a concentration camp survivor. He goes, this isn't normal. He said, unfortunately, where we live in our society, we would kind of like think like, oh, this is how you're supposed to look. And he goes, and it's not. And you better do something soon. Again, didn't really stand out. But that was also when I started just kind of trying to find more information. So that's what the professionals were telling me.
Yeah. Sadly, I don't think it changed that much.
Really?
Even though, we've been, especially Nicola has been trying to talk about this so much and, talk to professionals and go and speak at conferences and all of that stuff. And I think some people are more aware of it, but there's still plenty of professionals that will say the same and think that because it is common, it would be normal, which is not the same thing, right?
I do feel like there is more awareness now. I do feel like a lot more people are coming to my support groups and what have you saying, my doctor said I probably need to eat more and exercise less, So I think that message is getting out, but I think the details around exactly what to do are where there still needs to be more education.
Yeah. And I think there's a lack of understanding of disordered eating and eating disorders that you can't say to someone who's suffering, just go watch Oprah and eat bonbons. It's not going to work, So you have given the advice, but it's not enough for someone who's really using that as an emotional crutch to also do the work, right?
Yes.
And do you recall how you found the Fertile Thoughts Forum then? Is that where it started as well?
Definitely. I'm sure it was a Google search. I think I was stalking. I was probably stalking.
Before Google.
I know.
It was a Yahoo search.
You're right. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. I was definitely just kind of, when I found Fertile Thoughts, women were coming and joining because they wanted to restore their fertility. I was wanting to get my period back. So there was a difference, right? Also, I truly believed in to restore their fertility. I was wanting to get my period back. So there was a difference, right? But I truly believed mine was stress induced. I didn't believe it was because I was overtraining and undereating. I was like, this is mental stress. You don't realize I have a mom with schizophrenia. Like, I was like, you don't understand my life. Yeah. So I really had that in my head. However, I wasn't trusting, but I kept reading what Nico was sharing with these women and how these women were really gathering together. You were one of them, Florence, with Nico, and like really supporting each other and providing the truth, which is, it's simple and really hard. Improve your nutrition, decrease your stress emotionally and physically, right? Like easier said than done. And I kept reading it over and over and kind of like, okay, wait a minute. Maybe, and then I would secretly apply to Nico. And as you all know, anybody listening, and Florence, you know as well too, Nico gave selflessly. She continues to, but the time, the knowledge, the resources, and she even said to me, "You're right, 39 years old." I'm sorry, but like, just because you don't look a certain way, does that mean you're not smart and intelligent and beautiful? Like, I kind of like stepped into the community as that outlier, and you all wrapped around me, were excited to have me. And I was part of something that was so big and special. I still am. Outlier, and you all wrapped around me, were excited to have me. And I was part of something that was so big and special. So, and it's, So
I do remember. Sorry, I do remember that it took you a while to come around to the idea of going all in for recovery. I know you sort of, like you said, you sort of dipped your toe into the boards, you participated for a while, and then you disappeared, but came back and you were finally ready to really embrace all in and do it. So what changed for you during that time? Do you remember?
I don't want to say it was one specific thing. I do recall a couple of things transpiring. One is my health to continue to decline. Things that I didn't even realize until I recovered. Like, this is so crazy. One is I became allergic. I was lactose intolerant. I had a weird beef allergy. I was having anaphylactic shock from beef suddenly.
Wow.
And this is the weirdest thing, hand warts. And again, these were not things that I was associated. I know I'm that outlier, but this is what I'm going to say. When I recovered, those things went away. I was like, what? Wait, I can drink milk. I can eat beef. And I had a couple of hand warts. I'm like, I don't have, it was the strangest thing, but it was my body breaking down. It was, you know. I think the idea also that learning that I could restore my bone health at 39, like, okay, is this possible? Because I have to do something. I didn't want to take Fosamax at the time. I'm totally supported if somebody does, but I felt like, listen, they're usually giving this drug to people that are in menopause or much older. They're not giving it to 39-year-olds. I'm not saying you shouldn't take it. I'm just saying that was my thought process. And then seeing my mom, she had osteoporosis. She was in her 70s, but you know, she could step off a street curb and fracture. She did step off a street curb and fracture her hip. It was a microfracture, but it was a fracture. And she had them all the time. And, you know, I was tired of being injured all the time. So, and like Nico said, I don't know if this is going to work, but we could try. There was no loss in it. The freedom and that came with the recovery. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. That was kind of wordy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you're saying, because about 2 episodes or 3 episodes ago, when we had Dr. Schufelt on, she said that the latest research she has been doing shows that it's not just the bones that get affected, but it's also your cardiovascular health, your immune system. So what you're saying about suddenly becoming intolerant to some food, or reacting in a completely different way with, you know, warts, for example, it totally makes sense if your immune system would be affected as well. And all of us might react differently.
No, you're absolutely right. It's not cookie cutter, Florence. You're absolutely right. And that was the other thing. I laugh looking back. It's not funny, but it is. It was self-induced. But I think I became a hypochondriac a little bit. But I thought I was having heart palpitations too. But I thought it was because of stress. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It was stress
Yeah.
because my body was like stressed, like, okay, we got to
Yes.
pump a little extra here. Cognitively thinking the way we think, you're right, Florence, it's not just bone health. It are those
Yeah,
other things.
absolutely.
So, walk us through a little bit what recovery was like for you, Lisa, and what were some of the biggest learnings you had during this recovery?
Well, I feel like I kind of shared, the steps towards recovery, and the huge part of it was being informed with evidence. And that was provided through Nicola and through the women on the board. It was empirical evidence. It was stats, data. You cannot deny the science and people's experiences. And I'm sorry, I want to go back real quick because I thought this was real important too for other women that may be in their 30s. And one of the professionals I'll never forget that I was trying to recover with, one of the 10, he was an endocrinologist. And I told him about Nico's findings and evidence for just gain some weight and decrease your exercise and let's see what happens. And he's like, okay, but I think you're menopausal, so we want to be careful about gaining any weight. Well, 5 months later, I got my period and it didn't stop. Yeah. I mean, so that's the truth right there. Cause I was like, oh, I'm menopausal, but dang it. If I was not educated and informed, I would have just listened to that. I'm menopausal. I would have kept rocking on doing what I was doing.
It's certainly the case that people in their 20s, 30s, 40s can have primary ovarian insufficiency. So it can be that your FSH and LH are all sky high. That is a different condition from HA, but it's really important. If a doctor is telling you you're in menopause, like look at those hormones, look at your FSH. Is it in line with being menopausal or is it low? Is it more in line with HA? Same thing with your LH. Like LH is a really good marker for HA. If your LH is 1, 2, 3, it is extremely unlikely that you are in menopause. So that's really a good distinction to make. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, and I'm glad you did too, because I remember I was actually going through the blood work and my FSH was low at the time and my LH was at a 2 at the time. But I didn't know what that meant. So if I would have just listened to him, but I do now. And I look back and go, oh, thank goodness I listened. And I realize that everybody's becoming informed and educated, myself included. So I don't knock these doctors. They didn't know.
They can't know everything about everything.
No,
nobody does.
And that's why it's wonderful to look at the evidence and the science, not just what people tell us. We have to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Anyway,
absolutely.
So Florence, to answer your question, I shared a lot of what recovery was and dying to myself, if you will, like learning to tolerate and sit with discomfort mentally and physically. I mean, I spent a lifetime escaping through food restriction and exercise. It was escape of anxiety. It improved my self-worth for the moment, but it was destroying my health. I learned that nothing lasts forever. So as awful as it felt in the moment, or as wonderful as it felt in the moment, nothing lasts forever. And I think being adaptable, because that fixed mindset comes with HA, and then learning to be adaptable is so freeing. And that's something that was a lifelong, that I still work on. Just be adaptable, accept, and know that no matter what you're feeling, if it's wonderful, enjoy it. Okay. Cause it might not last. I always laugh because I'm like, I know that sounds depressing, but it's life, But then when it's bad, it's not depressing because you're like, this ain't going to last forever, And another thing, that I always say, feelings aren't facts. I know it's an overused term, but it's the truth. Sometimes we feel one way. I remember joking around on Fertile Thoughts and saying like, oh man, I feel like a sausage in its casing in my clothes today. And then the next day I felt like I was hot, so, like feelings are fact, so I wasn't a sausage in my casing.
So I really remember appreciating your straightforwardness when we were chatting on the boards, and you would just tell it like it was. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about you. And one of the reasons that when I was sort of looking for someone to join me and Stephanie in working on the book, that you came to my mind. So I'm just curious, I never actually asked you when I came to you and said, would you join us in working on this? Like, what were your thoughts? What did you think? Like, what were you considering? Tell us a little bit about that.
I totally remember that moment. It was exciting. It is exciting to think. I just remember it started because I was just kind of editing. I loved what you were doing. You and Stephanie were doing, Nico. Like, I saw how you were selflessly giving away your time and knowledge. So the book made sense, right, Florence? Like, oh my gosh, there can only be so much Nico to go around. Just write a book. My gosh. Right. Because she was like constantly answering the same question. And then I loved reading, because when I was kind of editing, like to give feedback, like, does it make sense? Because Nico's brain is pretty big. I used to laugh like, oh, you're up at 4:00 in the morning doing what, Nico? And she was on the board or writing or doing some kind of research. But anyway, I loved learning and reading, but sometimes I was like, okay, what exactly did you mean here? And then Nico was right. I would like kind of joke around and break it down, like when we were on the board, like what she actually means is, blah, blah, blah. So what it was cool about reading what Nico and Stephanie were writing was it was fun. So when they asked me, like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, you want me to be a part of this? I just loved it. I am still so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I am still part of something huge, it's their best life and the freedom. Exactly what you two are doing. You're doing that now. But this was through the book. And it's a privilege, an honor. I don't know how else to say that. That was long, right? Sorry.
But it's great. And I think we desperately need, scientists and people who can really analyze the data and discover what works, what doesn't. But then we also need people to translate that for dummies. So I think it was an awesome idea from you, Nicola, and Stephanie. I don't know who had the idea, or if it was both of you, to have had somebody who was really grounded and could kind of translate what you were going to say, because otherwise it could have become another book for scientists, which we needed something for, standard people to understand. And I think... Yeah.
So I just want to say, like, I don't like the characterization of it being for dummies. It's like, I have a certain level of training and, I would use words or concepts like receptor ligand interactions, and Lisa and Stephanie would be like, yeah, don't know those words, but that doesn't mean anybody is less intelligent than anybody else. It's
no. What I mean is,
I just want to,
Yeah. Those books, right, that they make that are just like a way to... It's a way to learn new concepts and stuff like that. That's what I meant. No, I mean, everybody with the book is a dummy, obviously. Yeah. But what I mean is there are so many people actually doing that work online of taking really acute, obtuse, I don't know how you would say, scientific information and being able to translate it for everybody to understand. And I think the three of you worked really beautifully on that, because it was not, when I first read the book, I remember thinking, wow, this is really easy to read. It's really compelling. It has experiences into it. And it felt also a little bit like the forum. It felt a bit like that sisterhood that we felt through the Fertile Thoughts boards. And because we're talking a bit more about partners and support in recovery, from your own point of view, Lisa, how did your husband support you in your recovery?
He wanted to learn. In fact, Nico will tell you, sometimes I'm like, I hear him to this day telling other men, like, oh, well, is your wife doing X, Y? Like, I'm like, babe, he didn't ask for your opinion. He's like, well, I could tell there's a symptom and blah, blah, blah. I think that he didn't quit. He didn't give up. He made things funny. I don't know if you guys are going to think this is funny or not. But anyway, I remember being really miserable. I had like gained some weight. It was fun gaining it. I liked eating whatever I wanted, having that food freedom. But sometimes it hit me, ugh, I don't like the way I feel uncomfortable. And that was like getting used to that uncomfortable feeling. And I remember trying to zip up my pants. I should have bought bigger pants, but I didn't. I was insisting on wearing the same ones. And I was like frustrated. And I remember saying, dang it, man, my pants won't zip. And he goes, looks like, and he was trying to be funny. And it was funny. He was like, looks like somebody's getting a little big for their britches. And in my mind, like I wanted to be mad, like I wanted to, I couldn't help it. It was funny. Okay. It was funny, but funny. So that humor, like it was almost like it didn't, like, it was good. Instead of being like, no, honey, you look the same, whatever. That wouldn't be helpful because it's not even true. It was kind of like, who cares?
Yeah.
But, anyway, I love too that he learned to not try and fix me. Because that's irritating. Mm-hmm. This is my journey. Yeah. Granted, do I need my environmental supports? Absolutely. But we can't fix somebody that is hanging on to HA behaviors. You can support them, you can educate them, but it's really their journey.
That's such an important point. Just the idea that we can't do other people's work for them, whether it's physical work, whether it's emotional work, like we can support, but we cannot make other people change. That has to come from inside them. And I think that that's something that I've had some relationships where it's sort of been like their issues have been put on me, like it's my fault. I'm like, no, like I've got my stuff to work on. You've got your stuff to work on. Like, let's separate the two here. And I think that's really true in HA recovery. You cannot force someone to do it. It has to come from inside them. And I think that's a really important point. And it's lovely that he recognized that, but was supportive. I think that having, like you say, having that environmental support is fantastic and much needed. It's hard to do on your own, but you have to be the one doing the work.
Yeah. And not fixing in the sense that you were not broken to start with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yes, of course, your health was affected by what you were doing with your lifestyle, but there's no sense of fixing. There's a sense of, okay, how do we get back to a place where we can really feel good, live well?
Yes.
You're not a broken person because you have HA, because you have an eating disorder. As you said before, and I'm so grateful that you shared, how you grew up and the situation as a young person, and that it helped you face something really difficult growing up. Because I think a lot of us started our habits for control of what we eat, how much we weigh, how we exercise, because we needed to face a challenge, an emotional challenge that was potentially bigger than what we could do. So I think, you grew up with a mom that was herself struggling with health. And this is something I really had to face too. I had a dad that was really mentally and physically affected by being bipolar and struggling with alcohol addiction. And I didn't actually develop my eating disorder until later, but I know that gave me a little bit of that situation with, growing up with difficulties was the ground to start an eating disorder at some point. And I still believe that the eating disorder at some point helped me overcome some of those difficulties and those challenges. So I wasn't broken. It's just that I was using the wrong mechanisms to support myself. And so what we're trying to do is getting the support from our partners or from our families to realize that there is another way that we can deal with that emotional challenge.
Yes, I love what you both shared. And you get it. Think about it. When you're focused on restricting, overtraining, when you're going to train next, when you're not going to, you're not thinking about your father. You're thinking about it's such an escape. It makes sense. So that's why I'm like, you're created to heal. But when we neglect ourselves, bad things manifest, it might hold on for a while. And then Nico, you mentioned something too about like having people dump their things on you, right? Like their experiences on you. And that's the other thing about enabling. And I don't know if y'all would agree or not, but anyway, it was my experience. Like, even I remember I was mad because I was cutting down my exercise. Look at me, I'm sacrificing for us, even though it was for me. And I'm not going to work out. And then he's like, hey, I'm getting ready to go take a run. I'll be back. And I'm like, wow, are you kidding? Like, I was mad. And then he's like, Lisa, I didn't neglect my body. I can work out and I can eat healthy, or I can eat a pint of ice cream. He said, why would I have to stop this because you have to? And he was right. I was just mad, I'm not saying that all husbands should do that, because some people are like, no, don't do that. I mean, that made sense to me. And I will say, if it was important to me, and I suggest this to others, if it really bothers you that much, of course, have that conversation with your partner. Like, hey, like, don't tell me you're going to go on a big old run. I can't handle it right now, But for me, I knew like, you're right. I have to make the sacrifice.
Yep. So you were really the driver of the partner chapter in the book. That was your baby, your brainchild. So tell us a little bit about what got you thinking about writing that chapter and about the survey that you did.
I was desperate for him to understand, like, I can't just stop. Please just eat more and just stop exercising yourself to death. Okay. Well, if it was that easy, nobody would have HA. And I really was desperate for him to understand. And not only that, I saw on the board, I heard a lot of women who are experiencing relationship issues with their partners, like them being frustrated and not knowing how to help and feeling alone. Like I always laugh, like I wish there was an HA board for the partners, even though I think we tried to like jokingly start one, but they didn't get on. But I did have a couple that reached out to me and said, hey, can my husband or my partner talk to yours? And it happened. But I think that was it, like to provide education and support to the partners. That was the goal.
And what was the survey then that you put together?
It was kind of brought together by questions that were repeatedly asked on fertile thoughts. So that's how I gathered that information, with coming up with the questions. And then looking at the results, when I think about it, the results from the partners, it was cool because it wasn't about their appearance or anything like that. I thought it was just neat. Like when somebody says, were you surprised about anything? I was like, I think that was just like, oh, wow, that observing these partners that were like, man, she's back, or she's more present and she's happier, even though she's crying more because she's feeling and she's not numb. We have more quality talks. Their health it was kind of neat. Oh, their flexibility. They're like, hey, we're going to go on a trip. Okay. Before it was like, well, I got to make sure I get my workout in, and or the gym there and that kind of thing. Anyway, and there's not anything wrong with that until it interferes with your health and your life. That's when the problem happens. So anyway, that's what I noticed. Like a lot of husbands or partners were like, wow, this is really neat. I want to see this. I want my wife to be happy. I want my partner to be free.
Yeah. When you did the survey, we sort of focused on like husbands. I've since updated the chapter to be less heteronormative and sort of more broadly applicable. So it's now partners in recovery as opposed to like husband support. So are they like, especially now with your social work that you do, is there anything else in the chapter that you sort of look back at and you're like, oh, maybe I would do this differently? Anything like that?
Well, yeah. And when we did the survey, we took it from a sample from women that had partners, and it was mostly heterosexual. And that's how that grew. 15 years almost later, of course, I would be more inclusive, more diverse, because now we have people without partners trying to get pregnant that are trying to restore their fertility. Yeah. So it'd be more inclusive, less stereotypy. I might skim it up a little if I did it. And when I say skim it up, it's funny that we talked about earlier, I might, for that chapter, for somebody that's like, I want to be a support person for this special person in my life who has HA. What can I do to help them? I would want to put more practical steps, behavioral challenges to help that person that's trying to recover from HA. Strategies, stuff like that. I probably would add more of the science, but not even simplify it, but talk about the blood work, the FSH, the LH, so that they can really be like, hey, what's your X, Y, and Z look like? Oh, it looks like you have HA. And what is the solution? And that's what I'm talking about, challenging people with their thoughts. You know, my husband would have done that for me. It would have been like, hey, Lise, I know you say it's stress induced, but the numbers are showing something different, even though you're an average BMI. So yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that would be cool. And I can see how I agree with you. There's actually a lot more women that come to HA recovery without even wishing for a baby, actually. So,
Yes.
and they could be supported by their sisters and their friends, and
Yes.
they don't have to be actually in a relationship to want to regain their
Yes.
periods. And
Yep.
I think it's extra interesting because the younger you get to that point where you realize that not having a period without taking the pill is wrong, the better your chances are later in life also for a much better prognosis. And the partners come a lot more than just, people you have a romantic relationship with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Before we move on to the next question, you mentioned something that I think it would be great to address, Lisa, which is bone density. So can you tell us what's happened with your bone density over the years? I seem to remember that you had a scan sort of while you had HA, and you've had at least one since then that did show some improvements. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I went from osteoporotic, which I didn't think was going to be possible again at 39, 41. I did not think I would be able to reverse the damage. Well, I didn't. Well, my body, again, our bodies are created to heal. They're going to do what they need to do. And I was still having a period and eating well and not overtraining. And my body restored the density it needed to. Not completely, but I wasn't digging the hole. I was repairing.
yes.
And it definitely improved. And that's in no period now what? It's
So for someone listening who doesn't know yet about the book or the chapter you wrote, what would you say is your number one tip for those with HA to remember when it comes to really going through this journey and dealing with comments also of family and friends?
okay. Comments, that was always a big thing. And it's funny because I say, take it in, because I believe people mean well, even when they say things when you're like, why would you say that? They mean well. Like, wow, you've gained so much weight. You look great. They mean well. They have no clue. Realize that they have no clue. Nobody will know what you're walking through, you know? And one important thing is, like, maybe we have one rotten apple in the apple cart and maybe the comment isn't nice. Listen, nobody's comments define you. You define yourself. And it's hard, easier said than done, just like gaining weight and decreasing stress, easier said than done. But you know what? When you sit back and look at that and go like, wait a minute, what they just said doesn't define me. And that could go both ways. Even if somebody's like, wow, you look wonderful. You have to believe it. That has to come from within you. But people aren't lying. They're not like, oh my gosh, you've gained some body fat. You look really good. They're not lying to you. How about that? And if you have to, set appropriate boundaries. Like if it's bothering you, it's a huge activator of stress. Hey, I'd really appreciate if you didn't comment on my body, because it's like, I'm trying not to think about it right now. I need you to not do that. Set a boundary. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's part of the recovery
absolutely.
too, is getting your voice, taking up space.
True.
Yeah, I think I tend to be very conflict averse. And so having a script like that, like, please don't talk about my body. It's not helpful right now.
Yeah.
That's all you need to say, So
Yeah.
absolutely. Any other key tips for somebody who's supporting a person in HA recovery?
I feel like when somebody's struggling, they're questioning themselves, what's going to happen, the what ifs. Remind them the what ifs are getting in the way of what now. What can we do right now to keep going? The what ifs. I mean, we can all do that, right? Get curious with them. If they're like, if somebody that you love or like are struggling with HA, and I don't know, they're struggling with, I'm full and I know I should eat. Tell me what's going on. You got to eat. You got to do that. Like, no, get curious. Ask some questions. Be patient. Sit with them. with their discomfort. It's uncomfortable not to fix people. I'm guilty.
Yeah.
But, I've learned.
Yeah.
I've learned to be like, okay. In my mind, I'm like, okay, I got all the answers right here. But I'm not. Let them answer it. And let them answer it for yourself. What's going on? Are you really full? When did you not eat? Oh, you're stressed. I wonder if that's bothering your stomach, but you need to eat. It could be, yeah. So patient, gently challenge those negative thoughts, those beliefs. Like I said, I had crazy things. I was like, no, this is stress. This has nothing to do with my nutrition or working out hard.
Yeah. I think we all went through that phase. It's called denial.
Yes.
But one question, do you feel like your journey with recovery, having an eating disorder, struggling with HA, osteoporosis at an early age, all of that stuff influenced you wanting to become a licensed social worker?
Absolutely. Understanding human behavior. Why do we do what we do? Why? And how can we take steps? How can we develop the courage to be uncomfortable and to do things different? It's not by telling people what to do. It's by empowering them with information so they can take steps to do what they want to do and live a life that's worth living.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really beautiful. And we have one question we ask all of our guests. Nicola, go ahead. What is our question?
Recovery is, eating enough and cutting out high intensity exercise. But we like to think of all in as more than that. So tell us how you're all in right now. Like, what are you all in on?
It's funny because I feel like talking with you, Nico, and Florence, it's kind of like we've been all talking about how we're all in. Right? Like we want to spread truth of what works and how you can experience your best life by changing or challenging untruths and experiencing freedom. And I want to help continue others to experience that through improving their mental, their physical, and sometimes for some people, their spiritual health. I mean, that is the bottom line.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Lisa.
Thank you for inviting me. This was an incredible experience to be with you both. I love what you both continue to do.
It was so fun to finally actually interact live together. Not through a forum, even though also it has been a really long time we hadn't interacted like that. So very nice to see you in this way. And tell me, can people find you if they want to potentially work with a licensed social worker? Or is there a way that you want people to be in contact with you? If they
I'm going to say, there absolutely is. I don't have a website or I'm not social media-ish. It's not because of my age. Just kidding. It is. But anyway, all right. I shouldn't even say that because I know like grandparents that like have like TikTok and it's just not my thing. But I'm going to suggest to go through going through the book. If somebody really felt like they wanted some therapy or whatever. But again, I'm only licensed out of Oklahoma and Florida. And I know, Florence, you do coaching. Nicola, you as well. But I'm happy to help and contact me through No Period Now What.
Yes. Yes. So if you're interested to get in touch with Lisa and you're in Oklahoma or Florida, then please do reach out because I think Lisa is going to be an amazing social worker and the experience you've had also as a fitness professional, because what you said in the beginning, I think is true. It's harder for fitness professionals to sometimes deal with the weight gain and the change in appearance, because sadly we live in a society, I think it gets better, but where we imagine that fitness professionals have to look a certain way, otherwise they're not qualified, which is completely untrue, obviously. But so if this is something, you're interested with, then we can obviously put you in contact. And we're so grateful for your time today, Lisa, and your enthusiasm.
Thank you both. Well, I'm excited to be with you both. I am. And I'm excited to share the truth, and to help motivate others with the evidence. We can't deny it.
Yep.
Well, we can, but
Yep.
all right.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
One thing that always strikes me is how different each person's all-in journey is. As I often say, there are many paths to HA and many paths out of it. Your journey is unique.
That is so true. If you need more support on your journey, you should definitely start with No Period Now What, which you can get at noperiod.info/book.
And Florence and I both work with people on different aspects of period recovery and so much more. If you'd like more personalized advice and attention, you can go to noperiod.info/appointments to schedule a time to speak with me on fixing issues underlying missing periods, blood work, diagnosis, and lots more.
Or beyondbodyimage.com to work with me on the fear of weight gain and making peace with food, exercise in your body. I also take care of the new French version of No Period Now What through the Instagram account Je n'ai plus mes règles _livre. We also have joint clients and online support groups, so you can access both our domains of expertise and get the physical and mental help you deserve to put an end to disordered eating once and for all.
If you enjoyed this podcast and found it helpful, please subscribe and drop us a review to help more people find it. Also, join our online recovery community at noperiod.info/support in English and noperiod.info/communique in French, and let us know how All In is going for you.
All In is not just about period recovery, it's about getting your life back. See you in 2 weeks.
Take all that you've learned about love and loss, pleasure and pain, and never get lost again.